In a previous video, we saw that the controls requested by users, or those we have to validate in transactions, are defined in the Rules section. We've already explained some of the rules that GeneXus offers, and now we'll be showing some additional examples. If we take our application for a travel agency, in this example we will suppose that all customers accumulate miles as they travel on different tours. Let's note the specific structure of the customer transaction. We can see that each customer may go on different tours. Now let's observe this attribute, customer trip miles. It allows the entry of the miles awarded here in the second level of the transaction for each tour made by each customer. Another design example, if the reality to reflect were this, would be to define that each tour has an associated number of miles to be awarded. So, in the second level of the customer transaction, that is, for each tour made by each customer, we could infer, have available this value of the trip miles attribute through the trip ID attribute. Just like we infer the value of trip date and of the other attributes in the trip transaction. But in this example, we define the miles received by customer and tour. In the instance they received different amounts of miles depending on the personal case. Also, each customer has a total of miles accumulated. Let's introduce the add rule. In the customer transaction, we declare the following rule. So what will be the behavior of this rule? The add rule includes the following behavior. When a new tour is entered for the customer, the amount customer trip miles is added to customer total miles. If one of the customer's tours is deleted, then the value of customer trip miles is automatically subtracted from customer total miles. And if the value of customer trip miles is modified in relation with one of the customer's tours, the previous value of customer trip miles is automatically subtracted from customer total miles, and the new value of customer trip miles is added. That is to say, the difference is adjusted. In sum, the add rule does exactly that. Add. It adds the first value to the second one when the user inserts, and solves the other transactions depending on whether something is being deleted or changed. Since this add rule we defined has at least one attribute of the second level, then GeneXus understands that it's associated with the second level, meaning that this rule will be executed every time the user inserts or deletes a line, or every time that the user modified the customer trip miles value in any line. GeneXus also provides the subtract rule, whose behavior is exactly similar to that of the add rule, except that in this case, as its name indicates, it subtracts when the user inserts and does the other operations as the case may be. Let's analyze this rule then. When a new tour is inserted for the customer trip miles value is subtracted from customer total miles. If one of the customer's tours is deleted, then the customer trip miles value is added to customer total miles. And when the customer trip miles value associated with one of the customer's tours is modified, the difference is calculated. We will now see a practical example of a particular aspect we must bear in mind when defining controls that combine the subtract or add tool with the error rule. Let's analyze the prize transaction that enables us to define awards given in exchange of miles redeemed. Customers are required to have a specific number of miles or more in order to be granted a particular award. So when the user executes this transaction and tries to assign a customer to an award, it must be previously validated if the customer actually has sufficient miles. If the miles are enough and the award is granted, that number of miles has to be subtracted for that customer, or otherwise, if the miles accumulated are not enough, then the corresponding error must be announced. Let's now see the rules declared in this prize transaction for solving this requirement. The subtract rule, as we've explained, will subtract the miles associated with the award from the customer's total miles when we insert the record of the award. On its own, the error rule deploys an error indicating that the customer does not have enough miles when the customer's total miles have a negative value. And why did we solve it this way? Because in this case, both rules involve the customer total miles attribute, where one of them updates it and the other rule evaluates its value. So, GeneXus determines that it must first execute the subtraction and then evaluate what happened with the value of customer total miles. Since the subtraction is performed first, if the customer's accumulated miles are less than the amount required for the award, then the customer total miles attribute will have a negative value, and consequently, the error rule must evaluate whether customer total miles is less than 0 or not. In such case, the error rule is triggered with the text that announces the error, and the subtract rule is undone, meaning that its execution is reversed, as if nothing had been done, and the customer's total miles remain unchanged. Otherwise, if after executing the subtract rule, the value of customer total miles continues to have a positive value, then the error rule is not triggered, and the subtract remains as it was done. We should remember that when the record corresponding to an award is deleted, the subtract rule acts by adding. So, it will add the number of miles corresponding to the award to the customer's total miles. To see this in runtime, let's press F5. We select Work with Customers. We can see the customers registered, and for each of them, the number of miles accumulated. Note that, for example, Susan Parker has a total of 650 miles. Let's grant Susan Parker an award that is worth 100 miles. We then go to the prize transaction and record the new award. We select today's date, the description of the award, that will be a dinner, the number of miles required, we select the customer, and when we infer the data, we see that the corresponding miles have already been subtracted. We confirm the award and verify the result by going back to Work with Customers. Now let's suppose that, for some reason, this award that was granted will be cancelled. From what we've seen about the behavior of the subtract rule, if this award is cancelled, then the 100 miles that were subtracted from the customer will be credited again. Let's then select the award. And we'll cancel it by pressing delete. We return to Work with Customers and can verify that the 100 miles were actually added again. Now let's try to grant Susan Parker a new award that is worth 1,000 miles. Since this customer does not have sufficient miles, then the error message must be issued. We grant a dinner award again, then indicate the 1,000 miles, and select Customer Susan Parker. Since in fact this customer does not have enough miles, the error message is issued. End to end, we will see a rule that offers the correlative automatic numbering of line identifiers, that is to say, the second level in a transaction. And considering that in this case, we cannot use the AutoNumber property with value yes because this property only numbers simple primary keys. This rule we present is called serial, for which we will see its use in the country transactions we've defined in our knowledge base. We want city ID to automatically receive a number every time the user defines a new line with a city, so it's not necessary to type it manually. Let's then declare the following rule. The first parameter must be the attribute to be numbered automatically. The second parameter must be an attribute that will necessarily have to be declared in the first level of the transaction, and will be responsible for storing the last line number assigned so far. Let's then define it in the structure of the transaction. Otherwise, it will not be possible to save this declaration. We go back to the sector of rules, where we must explain that in the last parameter we should indicate the increase, that is to say, the numbering frequency that we want. It should be mentioned that we can remove this attribute, country last city ID, from the form if we do not wish to have it visible. However, it is a requirement of the serial rule anyway. To see this in runtime, we press F5. We go into the country transaction and enter Uruguay with 2 cities. We can see that the lines were numbered automatically, and the last value assigned is saved in the first level.